Greetings. I am going to talk today about making plague rats. This is something that you will need for an event called It Takes My Child to Raise a Village, which occurs in the Middle Kingdom in Howell, Michigan in the spring. And it also has a version at Penzic War that you might have enjoyed already, but might plan on enjoying another time. It's a family-centered event, and this is one of our favorite games. So I have a little backstory first. In 2008, Sehilder and her canton of Wild Lake made 150 rats for the first It Takes My Child to Raise a Village. In 2016, Sehilder told me that her plague rats were dwindling in number and some of them were getting ratty. So I decided to help her out, and at Golden Seamstress, which is a sewing competition where you don't have to compete, and I didn't, in 2017, my son Tommy and I set out to make as many as we were able. We made 246 rats total during that competition and the following few weeks, and they were used at the event later in the spring. My focus of my project was at quantity, not necessarily quality, and you can see that we definitely need more better looking rats. She decided to keep the new plague rats here in Michigan and take the older rats to Penzic, where they now live in a wheeled tote, which is less stuff to haul to the event. So I'm going to show you a video of that event at 2017. And here we go.
I got it. Hey, there's your rat. Here you go. Looks like the sponge ones aren't flying very well.
Oh! Drop your rats where you're standing!
That one's over there.
Switch I said drop your rats! Switch sides! In an organized fashion without hurting anybody.
Did I really?
Raise the rats! I'm watching you.
I found them.
Like that one. No one expects the
You don't go back. Don't go back. Kids, come forward.
You know what? Hey, did you say back up?
Are the rat tossers ready? Hang on!
Game is played. And so I'm going to be mentioning a couple of things about that as we go forward. But I'm going to share with you a few still pictures of what the rats look like. And so they're not very fancy, but notice one thing, all of them have tails, right? This one's made out of a tube sock. This one's just trapezoidal shape. This one is mostly, this is the shape, basically the shape that was the original shape of the original rats, the original pattern, which I'm going to show you. And more rats, more rats, more rats, and more rats. This one's a big old tube sock. And this one looks like a sphere, but it's really not. And there we go. All right, so before you begin your plague rat adventure, you need to decide whether or not you're going to be donating them to the event called It Takes My Child to Raise a Village, because there are some specific do's and don'ts that I'm going to let you know what they are in this presentation with regards to fabric, accessories, and stuffing for It Takes My Child to Raise a Village rats. If you're making rats for your own enjoyment, then the sky is the limit. You can use whatever you want, but parts of this presentation may still be useful too. So I've seen many rats in my time, and some are really well made, decorated with faces, whiskers. They all have tails. That's an important thing, a tail. Participants like to use the tails to toss them, collect them, carry them around, and tails are definitely a requirement for the event rats. And you find that you like your rat so much that you can't part with it, it's no big deal. Make a rat, make some more. Now you have experience. So, now the purpose of this presentation is to instill confidence in any rat creator. Remember that Plague Rat game will be played outdoors, and the rats will be stored in a box for a year. They will be flung around, stepped on, not generally held and admired, and rats that you make for yourself can be as fancy or basic as you wish. So let's talk first about tails, since that's a requirement. I like to lucette. And for anyone who doesn't know, this is the tool called a lucette. And the tails can be made with finger loop braid, regular braided fabric or yarn, cloth, leather, ribbon, whatever you like. This favorite lucette was purchased from Kemmer Woodwork. It is kind of made off of the design of one that I found at Panzik, Valde, and I loved it dearly, but it started to wear out. So I took it to Kemmer Woodwork, and he kind of got an idea of how to make it. He made his own, and this is now my favorite. And so I'm putting together a handout for you, and link to that is in the handout. So now one important thing to keep in mind about rat tails is a knot. There has to be a knot at the inside of the tail. Okay, inside the body of the rat is a knot, and at the end is also a knot. Okay, because we don't want it to fray. They are rats, not horses. Okay, and so I will I could also use fray check. That could also stop it from fraying. You may not always accurately stitch through it, so I give it another little hand stitch through just to make sure it stays on, because you don't want to replace a tail. That's difficult. So, and so what I do is I'll just sit and I'll just lucette and lucette and lucette and lucette, and I'll just keep on going and going and going. I'm just sitting there watching TV, and I just keep lucetting. And so this one will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tails. So what I do is this end is already knotted. This is going to be the outside. And then what I do is I make a knot here and a knot here, and then I snip it right in between there. And this is what goes inside the rat body, and this is the end of the next tail. Okay, so this is just tied up. It's 3, 4, 5, 6 inches, however long you want your tails to be, and that's fine. And then I don't feel the need to color coordinate my tails. That can be fun, but it could be cumbersome too. So, and one more thing, rats with tails fly better, like kites with tails fly better, right? All right, so let's talk about rat bodies. I make the rats out of fabric scraps as well as old socks. As a seamstress who sews for 15 different people, I have a huge fabric scrap pile. So stuff like this can't really be too much else. I can make lots of rats with just this one piece of fabric. And I also have I am a mother of a teenage boy who lives in a house with a sock eating washer and dryer. So I have a bunch of socks with no partners. So I've used a lot of my socks up already. So I don't always put eyes on rats, but you can. You are using an applique or embroidery. You may want to do that before, or you can do it afterwards. It's possible to be done afterwards, but you want to install them before you stuff the rat and close the rat up. And this can be okay. Googly eyes and buttons might look fun, but they're not. they hurt when they get flung at a person. So if you're making them for the event, don't use them for the event. Ears are an option too, and they can be sewn on after you sew up the body. So I wanted to show you an example of a really well-made rat. See, here is, this one was made by, oops, I gotta get her name. I would like to share her name. Her name was Anna Lynch de Eubank, or Joanne Eubank on Facebook, and she is on the Shire of Talonville Facebook page, and she made this rat, which definitely caught my eye. And I loved how the button stitching looks like an X right here, and the tail is Shire Talonvale colors. Here was her collection when she finished it. Notice she has these cute little ears, and these are just circles with little tucks in them, and then she sewed them on. And so that was a really, really cool contribution, and I appreciate her sharing that with me. My little rat is not as fancy, but I did put little eyes on him, and he looks real cute. And I made this guy in 15 minutes. I'll share more about his process later on. All right, so fabric choices, and it really does depend on the focus of your project. If you're making fancy rats, use whatever you'd like. If you're making basic rats for donation to the event, they will need to be rugged, as they will take a good amount of abuse. And like, I don't know if this guy will be clean for very long because, you know, he's white. And so darker fabric might work better. Eventually all of them will get washed. So cotton, linen, broadcloth, they're all great. Denim might be a little difficult for hand sewing, but it's doable. Tulle is out of the question, okay? Anything scratchy, see-through, or sequins will not work for our game. Fake fur is great, but they tend to follow people home, so just letting you know, it might disappear. It won't be there the next year. Don't use wool. That's an important thing because many people have wool allergies, so we just won't use wool. And when you're making your tails, use acrylic or cotton. Don't use wool. I never use wool. All right, so let's talk about stuffing. Okay, cotton batting is really good, but there's something with that. I'll tell you in a minute. Old pillow stuffing works good, but I generally use Kroger bags. Okay, not only is it recycling, but you know, it's just, they work really well. They fly really well too. You could use old socks, just stuff them inside other socks. Fabric scraps, when you're tossing them around, after I toss them around most of the time at Tommy, I found that I prefer the plastic bags because they're weighted better and they can be thrown farther, but they take forever to dry. So this guy, he's got a plastic bag inside. He's going to hang like that for a considerable amount of time before he's dry if he ever needs to be cleaned. So I did stuff a few with sponges, and we found that they did not fly well at all. So if I were to make them with sponges, I would also use fabric scraps or something that weighs a little more. Okay. Polyfiber fill washes really well and dries the best, but when it's accompanied by fabric scraps, it flies better because they are very, very lightweight. So now there's a list of things that you cannot stuff it with, and this is from the higher ups, like people who are in charge of this event. So I'm sharing this with you, and this is important. Packing peanuts. Do not use packing peanuts. Anything that's biodegradable or water soluble. Plastic bean bag beans. Real beans or any other food product. Sand. Pine litter. Cotton candy. Just had to say that. Rocks, pebbles, or bricks. Yeah, it's a long list, but please don't put anything like that, okay? All right, so when we're sewing, you can sew by hand or by machine. I use a combination of my sewing machine and my serger. And so sometimes, and you'll see many of mine are serged on the outside, which is fine, okay? Let's talk about size. There's no rule for size. You can make them as big or small as you like. And I like to use the like I showed you, the no-show or the crew socks. Okay, but I sometimes use mine, which are a lot smaller. Okay. And I've made some from tube socks, and you can make 2 basically from a full-length tube sock. The largest one I made was about 12 inches, but I think they pack a punch and they don't really look like rats. They sort of look like the original design, which I'm going to show you in the pattern in a bit, but no, I won't make those anymore. I would stick to around 5 to 8 inches, or the size of a standard stapler. And the largest rat ever made was 3 feet long from the nose to the tail. And the smallest was the size of a $50. So it's about that big. Okay, so patterns. Some folks like patterns, and I've included a few suggestions, but honestly, what I do is I just take fabric, fold it, serge it, stuff it, and sew it up. That, yeah, that works too. But one option I found was to Google catnip toy patterns. Catnip toy patterns they're most often in the shape of a mouse, something that resembles a mouse or a rat. Okay, and I've included some in the handout that you're for sure going to get. Now you could also just make your own. You can choose a rat shape and size and draw it in pencil on a piece of paper. So for instance, there's this. You could make this and have this line be a fold, or you could cut 2 of these pieces and then cut this with this line being a fold, and that's your bottom. You got lots of options. And then and I'll show you that pattern in a second. And I'm going to share my screen now again and show you some different patterns that I found to be useful. So that's the one I just drew. Oh, you could add a little ear too. This one I like to catnip mouse pattern, and it's in the shape of a heart, and I'm gonna make one of those maybe. And this, but I wanted to show you this because this looks silly. The pointy part is the nose, so this shouldn't come out this end. It should be coming out the other end. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at that. See, this is what it looks like in the end, and there is where the tail goes. So you could fill it up with whatever. You could fill it there. You could also fill it on the end. You can sew it wherever you want. I just wouldn't do the nose because you got to stuff the nose. That's important. And there's a circle with a little tick, little dart there. And here is the original plague rat pattern with directions. Look at that. That looks pretty cute. And so this is supposed to be a flat rat, and so that's why I made some of them look like that. And so there you have it. All these patterns are, and links to more patterns that I'm going to show you, are all provided in the handout. So now the sewing process. Please make sure you sew your right sides of fabric together. We can never have too many reminders about that, right? And then turn it right side out to stuff it. If you're sewing by hand, I would recommend a rather close whip stitch or a back stitch, particularly for beginners. And if you want to add a straight stitch or a running stitch or a back stitch after the whip stitch for extra security, sure, go ahead. Remember to leave an opening to stuff, but size matters for that. You don't want it to be too big, and you don't want to have a lot, or you don't want to have a lot of sewing to do. So to use one of those patterns, I cut out a little heart shape. So what I would do is I would first, honestly, truthfully, I would tack down, I would put my tail in there. So I would get a tail. What color? Oh, let's make a purple tail. There we go. Now this one, what's wrong with this? No knot. So I've got to put a knot on one end. So let's make that happen. And so there we go. We've got a knot. And this doesn't need to be there. So there it goes. Goodbye. So I would tack that down with my needle and thread, and I would then I'd start on my serger. So once this is tacked down, and I don't have needle and thread ready, so I think I'm going to make it a little stitch with my machine. So there we go. And this is the repeating stitch, so it doesn't So it's in there. Let's see how well that worked. Nope, didn't work. So I guess I better do it with a needle and thread. All right, I'll get a needle and thread. And then I would go, well, let me just describe it since you don't want to watch me do this. It's boring. After that's done, I'll just pin it in place. There we go, so it doesn't move around. There we go. And then I would start right here at the nose, uh, use my serger so that cuts off the excess and stitch around, and I would leave about that much for stuffing, maybe a little more. Okay, and that it would be easy for me to, if I wanted to, I could zigzag stitch and sort of replicate the serging, or I'd just serge right up to there. You don't want to cut your tail off, so I'd stop and then make sure I tack that down really, really good so it doesn't lose its tail. Okay, so you could also, here's another option, if you have like a square of fabric, you could take the square and fold it one corner to the other corner. And then if you're serging, you just make it round if you want. Make it a triangle, who cares, right? So one end is going to be the tail, one end is going to be the face or the nose, and then you can sew it as you will. Okay, and even if you use the sewing machine, you can just sew in the shape that you want. So let's say you sewed with this sort of a line right here. I'll make the line right here. And you sewed in this sort of shape, and then you just cut this extra part off. Or leave it in because it's more weight to the rat, and that's fine too. You can have a seam at the top, you can have a seam at the bottom, it doesn't really matter, as long as you're doing eyes and ears. So this guy, I used a Sharpie, so it'll be fine and it'll stay, and if he gets washed he might get runny, and that's okay. And then yeah, so his seam is at the top, your seam can be at the bottom, doesn't really matter. So now, when you're stuffing, make sure you're using like a plastic bag or something you have to poke through. I would take something and like make sure it goes in. I know they make tools for that, and I have one somewhere. But anyway, I stuffed this right into the nose, so that's really secure because nobody wants a floppy nose rat. I mean, what's that, right? And then you can use a pencil or whatever. So I'm going to share with you some other patterns that you might enjoy. So sharing my screen to show you some more patterns. This one's a really good pattern. So it's a heart-ish shape with a flat nose. That's fine too. And that's the pattern that I use for my heart. And there's that plague rat pattern again. This one's pretty cool. And so you sew two of these and one of these. It sort of resembles this that I showed you earlier. And it makes a really cute little rounded shape. And look, they've drawn, nope, these looks like a French knot, embroidered French knot. That looks pretty cool. And so this one's a little fancy. It's got little legs or big long ears or whatever. Another one with a heart shape but not a pointed nose. And this one looks pretty good too. Well, that's a little bit more complicated. No. All right. So this one disappeared. I couldn't find it, but that looks really easy to replicate. The link, the pattern link disappeared from the internet. So I just wanted to share my experience, and you can share with me your experience. If you find me on Facebook or you see me at an event, show me your fabulous rats. And so making plague rats is a great service project, and we will never ever run out of the need for more plague rats. So show me your rats. If you participate in the plague rat game and you want to take one home, you need to remember that they have babies. And when you return, you have to come back with about 6 more. Okay? So happy ratting, and thank you.
Duck, duck, gray duck.